Hello! In this week's show we're going to concentrate on planting, how to choose the right plants for your garden. If you're frustrated your garden doesn't look as beautiful as it could, even though you've purchased lots of lovely plants, then help is at hand. Plants are not enough. You have to have a good design layout. And when you combine design with the beauty of plants, that's when the magic really happens. It's our mission here at Successful Garden Design to show you how to do it. And it's much easier than you may think. I'm Rachel Mathews and I've been a professional international garden designer for over 25 years and I teach garden design online. Now this is going to be a three-part episode. We're going to do a case study garden for one of my most difficult clients. But before we get to that, I'm going to talk you through what I consider to be the most important parts of planning your planting scheme. I'm going to show you what to avoid and where it usually goes wrong. Then in the second part, I'm going to show you in detail the garden that we're going to focus on. And then in the third part, in a few months' time, I'll show you how that garden turns out. So whilst this episode is going to be packed full of planting advice, there's still quite a good chance that it's going to upset the horticulturalist and plant lovers. You might not like what I have to say. Now, one of the main aims of this episode is to help you avoid and get past the springtime madness that hits as soon as we get a holiday weekend and the sun's out, if the sun comes out. And even if it doesn't, that urge to suddenly run down the garden centre and buy as many plants as you possibly can to fill your entire garden. Quickly, you've got to do it this weekend or else. That urge is what garden centre owners love, but it doesn't give the best results. If you can spend just a little bit of time planning and thinking about what you put in your garden before you rush down the garden centre, you will get so much better results. So, what do you need to know about your garden? The main things, it's an absolute given that if you want success, put the right plant in the right place. It's really simple. Putting a sun lover in a shady area isn't going to work. Putting something that needs shade in the sun isn't going to work, but you know this already. But again, if you impulse buy, you'll just think, oh, that'll do, I like the look of that, I'll shove that in there. That's when you waste a heck of a lot of money. So research the conditions you've got in your garden. Are the areas that you've got gaps in, are they in sun or shade? What type of height do you want? All that type of really basic stuff. So the aim is that you make a list of plants that will grow in your garden and that will suit your needs, so it's going to be in your colour scheme. Now in part 2 I'll go into sort of how you do that and how you put it down on paper, but to begin with, just assess what it is you need before you head off down the garden centre. Now something else that's really critical is allowing enough space for the plants. One of the mistakes that I made when I very first started, before I trained as a professional designer, was to cram too much in. In fact, it's very difficult to stop yourself. So if you can read up on the plants you want to buy and find out how big they get over time, that will help you space them. And if you're putting it down on paper, you can put it to scale so you can see just how much space you've allowed for each plant. And again, that really does help save you a lot of time, money, and digging things up at a later date. So something really important that I want to discuss with you, and this is the part that often upsets the horticulturalist and plant lovers, and it did actually upset me when I first sort of came across it, is what actually makes a garden worthy plant. Now, if you are a plant lover or horticulturalist, you will have completely different ideas on what makes something garden worthy than a designer will. If you think about it, the majority of the time you're probably viewing your garden from inside the house. So if you've put in a plant that requires a magnifying glass to see its leaves or flowers, and you're really not going to be able to see it from the house that well, it's taking up space, so it's not probably a garden worthy plant. You need plants that do a lot more than just flower for a week, for example. So if you're going to buy plants, think multifunctional plants. They've got to do more than one thing. So think phone. You know, who has a phone these days, apart from my mother, who is just a phone? You know, most of our phones play music, they surf the internet, you can take pictures, video, organise your life, and if you're really sad you can even have a conversation with them and ask them where you should go and have your dinner. That is what one device does these days. So when it translates to a plant, you want a plant that perhaps has evergreen foliage, it flowers, it fruits, it's variegated, it has an interesting shape. The more assets that plant has, the more value it's going to have in your garden and the more interest it's going to create. And if you've got a really tiny garden, that is even more critical. Now, if you've got loads and loads of space, yes, then you can maybe have something that does flower for 1 week or 1 day or whatever. But if you can get at least 95% of your garden plants to have more than one use, so it's not just about the flowers, it's not just about the foliage, they're an interesting shape, or they fruit, or they do something other than just flower, you'll create much, much better results when you come to putting them together. Now, if you're a real keen plant enthusiast and you've read about some amazing plant that was saved from the brink of extinction by a blind man on a 3-legged mule with frostbite, it's got an amazing story, but you need a magnifying glass to see it. Do not put that in your garden. Put it in a botanical garden, maybe in the glass house, anywhere, but don't stick it in your garden. That, to me, doesn't have garden value. You do still need some star performers. Even though we've picked a lot of multifunctional plants that can play multiple parts within the garden and scheme, you still need to have a few that just have the wow factor. They also need to be multifunctional, so, you know, the shape is important, etc., etc. But they're the things that flower for months on end, like lavenders, nepeta, the catmint. And finally, the next part that I think is very, very important is colour. Getting the right colour schemes. Now, I'll demonstrate how to do that in part 2. So they're the basics that I think you need to get right. Now, there are a lot more things that you can focus on when you sit down and do a planting plan, but those basics will take you a long, long way. I just want to quickly tell you about the plant design formula for those of you that want to know everything about how to create a gorgeous planting scheme, and there's a lot more to it than I can possibly ever cover in a garden design show. Our Successful Garden Design Plant Design Formula course walks you through everything you need to know step by step. And it also contains a database of nearly 400 plants that you can organise by colour, shape, size and hardiness, etc. so that you can choose exactly the right plants for your planting scheme. Now, we're going to do a special offer on this plant design course, so if you're interested in learning how to do a planting scheme like a professional, then head on over to successfulgardendesigncourses.com/plant design. Now, my parents were very brave. When I was 19 and decided I suddenly wanted to do gardens for a living, they let me loose on theirs, and I'd read one whole book on garden design. Well, I say a whole book, I'd skip the boring bits, obviously, you know, like measuring, surveying, all that boring stuff that you don't need to do. Oh, you need to do it. Anyway, they let me loose on their garden, and I spent months researching what plants I was going to put in. In those days, you know, it was over 20 years ago, there was no internet. I know, shocking. Well, there might have been, but we didn't use it. You had to rely on books, and you got a description this big that told you about the plants, and I tried to plan it from that, and I made a lot of mistakes. Now, it was very fortunate that I made all these mistakes in my parents' garden and not a paying client's garden, because I learnt a great deal from living with those mistakes. And one of the main mistakes I made was not allowing enough room, and also misjudging the height of plants. That's very difficult because a book will tell you something gets to 60 centimetres high, so 2 foot, but actually that's when it's flowering. The actual plant might only be this high. So if you've put something in the middle of the border thinking that, oh yeah, that gets to 2 foot because you've read it in a book, then you end up having to move things around. And that's what we had to do in my parents' garden. Even though I put all this time and effort into researching, it still went wrong. But thankfully, these days we have the internet, so it's so much easier. You can do a Google image search on the plants you want to put in, and you can see for yourself the shape and overall height and the type of thing that that plant does. So you might be wondering, if my parents were so brave that they let me design their garden when I wasn't qualified, why are they my most difficult client? Well, whilst they were very brave the first time I designed their garden, because of all the mistakes I made, and then I moved out and left them to it, I created the Day of the Triffids for them. And the garden just went berserk. All my little experiments, I thought it would be a good idea to have a eucalyptus bush that I'd keep pruned, and that would be a nice evergreen background for all these lovely plants in front. I forgot to prune it one year, and the next year it was 30 foot high. Little things like that. Left them, shall we say, a little traumatised. So by the time I was qualified and, 10 or 12 years later and knew what I was doing, by the time it came to this garden, they put quite a long list of restraints of things I was and wasn't allowed to do, which, is understandable. I think they were still traumatised by the first garden I'd done for them. So I wasn't able to design this garden quite as I'd like, and as I'll show you a bit later on, a few things haven't quite worked out. Because it was my parents, I wasn't as forceful as I probably would have been had it been a client. So this was the garden as my parents first moved into the property, and the brief with this one was basically to have it as low maintenance as possible with as few plants as possible. So the area that I feel it's gone wrong on is the left hand side by the hedge. The border is far too narrow for the planting, and this is where I really should have been insistent and made sure they had it larger, but I didn't, and as a result the planting, although we kept the hedge tightly clipped to begin with, as you can see in this image here, it's gradually started to move over and it's forced the plants out. And also with the change in conditions, with the winter flooding, we've lost a lot of things. So they've been stressed in the summer because of the hedge taking all the moisture out the soil, and in the winter months where it's been flooding, a lot of stuff has died out, so we need to redo the border. Now this is how the garden looked from the other side. Now this side had a lot more plants because of the shape of the pool and everything, so it was always a bit lopsided for my sort of comfort and tastes. So now we really need to figure out a way. You can see here this was filmed in February. We need to figure out a way to make this border larger and more functional and completely redo it basically. In the next episode, I'll show you precisely what it was that we're in the process of doing to rectify this situation. But I want to hear from you. What do you think is the best way that we can sort out and make this border larger? What would you do if it was your garden? Now in the next episode I'll show you the solution to that problem we've got with this garden with the border being too narrow, and I'll also talk you through the processes that I'm going to do to create the planting plan for it. Now you can leave your answers to this week's question by going to successfulgardendesign/show 8. So if you've enjoyed this week's show and you think you know people that it will help, do please share it with them, and of course do please leave a review on iTunes or YouTube. It really helps. The more comments you leave, get this show out there, and it's going to help as many people as possible, which is my absolute aim with Successful Garden Design. So I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. And if you'd like some more top tips on how to add the wow factor to your garden, I've created a cheat sheet that you can download and a short video tutorial that walks you through the top 5 things that you must do if you want to create a stunning garden. So head on over to successfulgardendesign.com/wow and you can download your cheat sheet there.